Welcome to This Week in Christian History, a podcast from the Center for Christian History at Mississippi College. The Center for Christian History is dedicated to expanding knowledge and understanding of Christian history. Our mission is to provide a scholarly, unbiased look at the events, figures, and movements that have shaped Christianity over the centuries. You can visit centerforchristianhistory.com for daily historical highlights. And each week on this podcast, we'll do a deep dive into key moments with Christian history's leading authorities. Our first historical highlight for the week is Reverend William Blair, who was commissioned by the Sunday and Adult School Union on August 4th, 1821. In just his first year of work, Blair rode 2,500 miles on horseback, visited 6 states, and established 4 adult schools and 61 Sunday schools. Very shortly after hiring Blair, the Union decided he needed more help and hired additional missionaries. After 190 years of faithful work, the Union changed its name to In Faith in 2011. Our next historical highlight is Pope Pius VII's formal restoration of the Society of Jesus on August 7, 1814. Following this restoration, which ended a decades-long suppression, the society spread across Europe and many other parts of the world. The Jesuits became strong defenders of the papacy, and, 200 years later, Pope Francis became the first Jesuit pope. Our final historical highlight for the week and the subject of our deep dive is Adoniram Judson, who was born on August 9, 1788 in Malden, Massachusetts. Judson would become one of the most well-known missionaries of his time, serving for decades in Burma, which is now Myanmar. As a part of his work, he developed the first Burmese English dictionary. Today in our deep dive, Nick Walters, director of the Center for Christian History, talks with Brent Aucoin of the Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary about Adoniram Judson.
Okay, we're back again for another episode of This Week in Christian History. And this week that we are focused here in August we're focusing on August the 9th, 1788, which is the day that one of the premier missionaries throughout the world was born on this day, Adoniram Judson. And there's probably 800 different ways to say his name, okay, because it's not Tom, right, or it's not Brent even. So that makes it that a little bit easier. We're glad to have Dr. Brent Aucoin be with us here, who is a professor of history at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in North Carolina, and he also is an associate dean for Judson College, nonetheless, which is headquartered there on campus. So, Dr. Quinn, thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, tell us about, some background on Judson, and he obviously had some impact if he gets a college named after him, and he's at a college, right, I think in Alabama at one point in time, and a town in Arkansas named for him. So I wouldn't say he's B-team. He certainly is A-team. Give us some background on him and kind of why we might be talking about him today.
Well, big picture, I guess the main reason we're talking about him would be that he's considered to be one of the first missionaries to ever be sent out from the United States of America to the foreign mission field. After William Carey and British Baptists had sent out missionaries and others behind them in England from various denominations, America had yet to send out any missionaries. And Judson was a part of the very first group of those men and women sent out specifically as missionaries by missionary organization. And so that makes him historically significant. But beyond that, the work that he did ultimately in Burma, modern-day Myanmar, was one that, though certainly not flawless and perfect, in many ways is a model and an inspiration even to missionaries today and wannabe missionaries. And so reading his story, really the story of the Judsons, he and his wife and wives, so end up losing 2 wives and marrying 3 times before his life is over. But each of those wives was very much a partner, participant in the missionary endeavor. And so reading and knowing their stories gives us a glimpse into how not only how missions were done in their infancy, if you will, in the modern Christian movement. But even how can they best be done even today? Like, what can we learn from them? Because although it's a common story, although there weren't immediate great results once they landed on the field with hard work and perseverance and presumably the blessing of the Holy Spirit, there was a harvest eventually.
Well, so how did he come to be a missionary? Do you think this, I mean, what's his backstory, as we might say, for him to be able to go from whatever epiphany he may have had from the time that he got on the boat?
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating story, and it's one where we can go into a great deal of detail, but let me try to give you somewhat of an abbreviated version of it. So he was raised in a Christian family. In fact, his father was the pastor of one of the pilgrim churches there in Plymouth. So it was actually the third congregational church of Plymouth, but one of those churches that you can tie back to the original pilgrims. And so his father was a pretty respected preacher and pastor in his own right, but his son, Adoniram, was very bright and intelligent, and both of his parents recognized that early on, as did others, and great things were expected of Adoniram. And eventually great things were accomplished by and through Adoniram. But let's see, so raised in a strong Christian home, his father urged him to go actually to Rhode Island College, what is today Brown, which was a Baptist school, because the main congregational school there, for most of those who were in the Plymouth area, typically go to Yale. The father believed that Yale had sort of gone astray theologically. And even though they were not Baptistic, he preferred to send his son to the Rhode Island College, which was fairly new, as opposed to Yale. And Judson indeed goes to Rhode Island College. In fact, when he arrives, he's only 16 years old. He had just turned 16.
Wow.
He had graduating as the valedictorian. So very smart, gifted. However, while he was there, he befriended a man who was named Jacob Eames, very open about his lack of belief in God and at times his ridiculing of Christians. And so by the time Judson graduated, he was no longer claiming to be a Christian. So the story of how he ends up, being this sort of great Christian figure kind of starts from there. How do you go from leaving college basically as an unbeliever? And it's an amazing story. It's a wonderful story. And the kind of the shorter version of it is after graduating, eventually tells his parents he's not a believer, much to their grave disappointment. That he actually aspires to be a writer or even an actor, and he's just going to make his way to New York City to make a career in one or both of those areas. And in short, things do not go as planned for him there in New York City, and becomes somewhat despondent, not sure what to do. And sort of the famous part of the story is eventually just leaves New York City, not really sure where he's going to go. Kind of goes in the direction of one of his uncle's homes, and famously stops for the night at an inn, and learns that there's only one room left. But takes it, even though the innkeeper warns him the person next to you is very sick and moaning and groaning, and so you'll have those noises. But with no other alternative, Judson decides to stay, and has a hard time sleeping that night, but eventually does fall asleep, wakes up the next morning, and inquires with the innkeeper about the person next door, and is informed the person had died.
Wow.
The innkeeper mentions that the person who had died just next door to Judson, who throughout much of the night heard his English was his best friend from Rhode Island College, Jacob
Okay.
Eames. And Jacob had graduated a year earlier before Judson, and so they sort of lost touch. And God had already been sort of doing things with Judson in his period of unbelief, if you will. And even that very night, as he heard Jacob Eames in his anguish next door, God had put thoughts into Judson's mind he later would recollect. But particularly learning of his death. He sort of later wrote about that he reflected on Eames's death, that if the things that Eames had believed and helped to teach to Adoniram Judson about God not existing and sort of that mindset, he said, if that's true, then Eames's life meant nothing. It was just a mist and vapor that's gone, and that just can't be the case. And so ultimately, after that episode, Judson had gone towards his uncles, goes back home. His father ministers to him, gets other sort of leading Congregationalists to sort of pour into Adoniram Judson, and Judson's faith comes alive, and they convince him to go to seminary, and so when he does that, when he goes to seminary, it's there that ultimately he is converted. Andover Seminary, it's in 1808, I believe it is, that he's ultimately converted there. Says that really, I don't know if you want to use the word converted, but at least writes down that it's at that point he has committed his life to Christ and to serving God. So so goes to seminary and very quickly begins really just being exposed to writings dealing with other lands, other cultures, and particularly sort of just the lack of Christian witness and the gospel elsewhere. So it wasn't necessarily works promoting missions, although there were some of the things he read were explaining what William Carey and his fellow British Baptists were doing in Serampore. But he just read about other lands, including Burma. Came across a book there at Andover Theological Seminary dealing with Burma, and just was fascinated to read about it. And so in the course of those readings in his first year at Andover, he became convinced that God was calling him to bring the gospel where it didn't really exist, and to go overseas specifically. Now, of course, his parents were thrilled that he had sort of gotten through that phase of rejecting the faith, but they had high hopes and really well-grounded expectations that Judson would be even one of the most famous preachers in America, that he was just gifted to be able to, sort of come into that position one day.
You can watch the rest of Nick's interview with Brent Aucoin on the Center for Christian History website at centerforchristianhistory.com. This Week in Christian History is produced for the Center for Christian History by Blue and Gold Media at Mississippi College, in cooperation with the MC Department of Communication. For episode transcripts and more information, visit centerforchristianhistory.com. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow the Center for Christian History on Facebook at the Center for Christian History, and on Instagram at Christ Hist Today. That's ChristHistToday. Our next podcast episode is coming next week. Thank you for listening.